We can see people joining in. Hello, all of you who are joining us. We'll give it just a couple of seconds to let people get in. So I might ask everybody to switch off their videos and to mute their microphones, because you'll then see each other rather than see Lenny. Cool. So, hi everybody. Hopefully you're all in. I'll just remind you, and I'll probably remind you a couple of times just to switch off your video and to mute your microphones for the time being. We'll open them up a little bit later. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second FilmEU Experts on Air. Hopefully we have students from Estonia, Portugal, Belgium, Ireland, and no doubt lots of others with us today to welcome acclaimed Irish filmmaker Lenny Abrahamson. Lenny and I will have a chat with him for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open up the session for questions, and we'll wrap it within the hour. By way of introduction, I think I first met Lenny when I was working for Irish producer Ed Guiney. Ed was producing a medium budget feature film for Universal Pictures, at the same time as trying to raise financing for a low, I think it's fair to say when I say low, I mean pretty much no budget indie that his pal, who made commercials, wanted to make based on the script that an actor friend had written. The commercials director was Lenny and the writer was Mark O'Halloran. The film Adam and Paul went on to really incredible critical and audience acclaim for its director and its main cast, Mark and Mark's ex-partner, the much missed Tom Murphy. For me anyway, it crystallized a new wave of Irish filmmakers who were emerging onto our screens. Then he went on to work with Mark and Ed again and made Garage, followed by What Richard Did, Frank, and in 2015 he directed Room, for which he received an Academy Award nomination. In 2020, in the midst of lockdown, he proved to the world what we always believed, that the Irish could actually be sexy on screen in the wildly popular television adaptation of Sally Rooney's Normal People, which he exec produced and directed, along with director Hetty MacDonald. All this while being pretty much just a lovely human being. Ireland's a pretty small country. I know he's getting embarrassed. This is for a reason. Ireland's a pretty small country, and we have a healthy ability to have a go with literally everyone. In the 20 odd years since I heard about Lenny, I have never heard a bad word about him. And I can safely say he's the only member of the Irish film industry that I can say that about. It's not that he's a pushover, it's far from it, but he's liked and he's hugely respected. And I don't say this just to compliment a guest, but because the topic of the conversation today is about the power of collaboration. And through Lenny's career so far, collaborations shine through. So now that you can live without the embarrassment. I might just try, Lenny, and bring it back right back to the early Trinity days where you met Ed, and maybe talk about some of those early relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I've the fact that this I'm going to hide myself actually, otherwise it's going to be bizarre. I'm going to be talking to myself. Just move this aside. Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky that I've worked with many of the same people that I met right at the beginning, not just of my kind of filmmaking life, but much earlier, so I collaborate with the closest collaboration has been with Ed Guiney, as you mentioned. And my relationship with Ed actually goes back to when we were even, in school, or we were in different schools, but Dublin is a small place and I knew Ed, and we used to just bore everybody with our conversations about film and how much we loved it from the time we were about 15. So, and then the composer I work with, Stephen Rennicks, I've known him since we were in primary school, so about 9 years old, played in bands with him. And actually, yeah, it's good you stay on, Barry, that way I'm actually talking to somebody. So in that sense, that says something, I suppose, about how it's worked for me. But I think also I need other people. I mean, I really like, just at a sort of psychological level, not just because of the skills they bring, but I find that my kind of ability to like push things through is also in a way partly a function of being accountable to other people, like emotionally, morally accountable to other people. And there's something about the kind of demons that can assail you when you're working solo, which, I don't know, you just have to deal with when other people are involved. Now, since, as the years have passed, I find it easier to For example, to write, like one of the things I'm going to do now post Conversations with Friends is spend quite a few months not directing but writing. And I've always written on the things that I've done, but I've sort of written with or around or over what other people have done, apart from the projects that I've written and just sort of kept secret. And so there's obviously something in me that thrives in a kind of, or is enabled by collaboration. I think actually that is an essential, whether or not it's as kind of deeply ingrained in a person as it is in me. I think something of that capacity to and relishing of collaboration is central to the work of a filmmaker. Like, I think it's, you will be collaborating whether you like it or not as a film director. You'll be dealing with producers, you'll be dealing with writers or script people. You'll certainly be dealing with execs and studios and broadcasters. And then you'll be dealing with actors and you'll be dealing with crew and other creative people. And your choice is to approach that in a kind of defensive stance, or it's to approach it in an open stance. And I think, traditionally, there's been a kind of a sort of machismo around the idea of directing, which is just it's just a particular cultural kind of thing that becomes attached to it's like being a chef or something like that. People love the stories of furious, shouting, kind of dictatorial filmmakers. And actually, for me, that's a sort of weakness, because it shows a lack of confidence. It shows, really, in a way, a kind of rigidity as well. And if there's anything that I've learned from making films, it's that mental and artistic flexibility is the thing that allows you to stay close to the material in a way that is much stronger than a kind of rigid, I'm going in with my ideas, the much vaunted vision, directorial vision. And there is a thing, that is a thing. But you shouldn't mistake the idea of directorial vision for some kind of fully fixed, absolutely bulletproof mental picture of what you want. And then it's about like beating everybody else into delivering that. It's much more effective to guide, to encourage, to kind of inspire people, and then to allow their creativity to kind of elevate you and the project, all underneath the sort of conception that you bring to it. Anyway, going back to your original question, I think I learned that pretty early, and that was a sort of natural style for me, and that kind of impulse to collaborate is always, or to make collaboration, because you will collaborate, to make collaboration rich and rewarding has always been like central to the way that I've worked.
So I didn't know that Stephen Rennick you picked up Stephen Rennick at that time as well.
Age 9.
Age 9, Jesus. It's like literally like the whole end of the Irish film industry if you and your pals were just...
I know, it's crazy. And then actually, just to say that other people have come on board as we've gone. So like I work with an amazing editor called Nathan Nugent, who's a really central part of the process. And then I've recently been working with Susie Lavelle, the DP, 2 projects in a row, which is, been brilliant. So yeah, it continues to happen.
I might take you back a bit to first working with Mark O'Halloran, who I know reasonably well. He's such a lovely guy and so talented.
Yes.
But you chose as your first feature film a film written by an actor who was also going to be the lead in the film, and the co-lead was also the ex-partner of that actor. I mean, it kind of sounds like children, animals, and
oh yeah,
domestics. I know it's probably not, but like.
And we were also shooting with no money on, in really tricky parts of the city. But interestingly enough, so a few things. First of all, like when I came across Mark, I didn't know him as an actor really. It was a friend, Johnny Spears, who I was making commercials with at the time. And I had made one short before I made commercials, and then I'd gone on a different journey and come back and whatever, and was making commercials to make ends meet.
In fairness, the short was pretty succjohn but that's for a different day. Like.
Yes, indeed. And then Johnny knew that I was desperate to make a feature and that I was kind of tiptoeing around things that I was sort of developing. And then Johnny met Mark at a play that Mark had written and said, do you ever think about writing things for cinema? And Mark said, oh, I have a load of ideas. And then he went home and sketched out a load of ideas because, that's what good writers do. Like, and gave Johnny this envelope full of ideas, including this treatment for Adam and Paul, which I read through everything. And the Adam and Paul thing just absolutely leapt out at me. It was just a lovely and lucky moment because that, like, hang on.
Just 1 second, sorry.
This is great because, as I said to Lenny earlier, I know that there's a delivery man coming between 12 and 1, so I'm going to get the door knocked on as well. Sorry,
that's okay. So yeah, I mean, it was like one of those really incredibly lucky things where a whole bunch of impulses that I always had towards a certain style found this idea that Mark had and this sound of the dialogue that he was playing with. And it just was like a sort of lightning bolt for me. I just thought, I absolutely, totally can see how this can work. And because what it was an outline and some sample scenes, but the characters were absolutely there. And the kind of circularity of their journey was sort of implied, like it was just, it was like catnip for me. So we met and got on so well and talked films and references. So it was really natural, that collaboration and that feeling of excitement. It's like a really foundational thing for me. Like it's what you're sort of looking for, whether it's a book or a script you come across or an idea of your own. It's that feeling of fertility, like I can't stop. Like, it's not like you're trying to stretch something to fill the 90 minutes. You're actually, there's just a sort of bubbling feeling of excitement. But then, so originally Mark was not supposed to be in Adam and Paul.
Okay.
It was Tom and another actor. And then that other actor pulled out last minute, like with probably 2 weeks to go or something. And I had to persuade Mark to do it because he thought, no, it's.
But he knew the lines, I suppose.
He knew the lines, exactly. And actually then we flipped the parts. Tom was originally playing the other part. It was completely.
I did not know that. Wow.
Such serendipity. And then when we did that, we just went, bang, that's it. Absolutely bingo. He's, Tom was perfect and in that role, as he turned out to be. So that's how that came about.
I know it's a while ago, but can you remember kind of the practicalities of being like on set with the writer, the lead, yourself? Was it easy? Did you have to work with it?
Yeah, it was actually a really joyful shoot. I mean, it was hard. It was like 4 6-day weeks on the streets, barely any lights except for a few night scenes, no security, just the, proper low budget filmmaking.
Sure.
But I had done many, many commercials at that point, and I was also a complete cinephile, and I'd had other, shorts, things like that. And I was working with people that I'd started collaborating with on those, like James Mather, who I worked with twice again, a great DP. And so actually there was a level of skill on set that a first feature didn't have any right to have, if you know what I mean. Sure. Just in terms of technical stuff and at least some comfort being on set. But I think for me, the difference was just keeping in your head that whole big thing versus, and a thing that you care deeply about. Not that I didn't work hard on commercials, but I ultimately didn't believe in them or sure. And I could see the deep limitations of them in every respect. And I'd reached a point where I felt like, God almighty, I just, I have to do something else. But I did feel like I knew how to be on set. I would hate to have made a feature after making one short, for example, or just from 0 to 60. And I know people who've done that. I think it's extremely difficult. I often say to young directors that a lot of your energy at the beginning of your directing life on set is used up in the kind of internal panic of, oh my God, this is happening. I better not mess it up. Just the overwhelming thing of being in that position that you maybe have dreamed about and then being afraid that you'll blow it or just the
I guess
newness.
You're in charge of something.
Yeah.
That you've a lot less experience than everybody else in that environment has.
So I think as you go on, it becomes less and less about that and more about the work. And I think there was still a tremendous pressure because it was the first feature, and you think, well, if this is bad. And I remember the first day we were on set, not a great relationship with Mark, so we would be joking all the time. But the very first day we shot the scene where Adam and Paul end up mugging a kid with Down syndrome. And we both said this could be really the end of our filmmaking lives if we don't do this within, if this isn't if we've miscalculated tonally. But also Mark was incredibly generous. Like he never was defensive over script or anything like that. Like he was, and we'd worked on the script so closely. But he always felt like when it comes to the directing, I'm just going to be an actor. And that was very generous of him.
Okay. I might switch well, it's not really completely away, but I mean, you were talking about tone there a little bit, and we mentioned Stephen Rennick's a little bit earlier, as somebody that, a bit like Ed, that you've worked with pretty much on nearly everything.
Yeah.
Maybe just talk about that relationship and about, I guess, the power of music in your films, or the use of music in your films.
I mean, I love music, and I play badly, but I played in and being a part of that world on and off. And like in Frank, for example, which was obviously a film sort of about music. I was in the studio with Stephen with the demos happening, with musicians talking about ideas for songs and writing the odd lyrics. And like, that was a joy because I love it. I think it was, what's really interesting is that, like, developing a relationship with Stephen, and this is a good example, I think, of why long-term collaboration can be so useful. So Adam and Paul has this lovely soundtrack, which is it's like a kind of Eastern European village band or something. And we wanted to, like, the whole Bulgarian, Romanian thing, and the idea of this kind of European style, like Scandinavian, Finnish style slapstick of like Kaurismäki influence and all that. And we wanted to say, this is absolutely an Irish film. There could not be two more quintessentially Dublin characters than these two. But our artistic references spread, east rather than west, I suppose. And that was part of it. And the music is part of that. And there's quite a lot of music, and it links and it tonally fixes aspects of the film. But when it came to the next film, Garage, I was working with the same composer who I'd worked on Adam Paul and all my ads and shorts and everything. And it turned out that we both agreed as we went on that it really didn't need music. There's only 3 cues: the titles, the credits, and 1 cue in the middle. And I think if you were working with a new, like, composer maybe, or somebody who's really hungry to build a reputation, it'd be really painful for them to have like that tiny
to fire themselves off
but in Stephen's case, it was just, this feels like the right thing to do. It was just another conversation, and we knew we'd be working together on the next one. So that apart from anything is really helpful. But yeah, I'm really interested in how music works. I tend not to score scenes. In other words, it's very rare that you've got music over dialogue in the sort of traditional Hollywood way. But I like to use music as punctuation and as a place to create spaces in a story where you can reflect as an audience on what you've just watched. And so within the poetics of the story and the kind of the rhythmics of it, the music works really, is kind of central.
Okay, it's interesting. I remember there was a John Hopkins cue in Room that almost killed me, I think.
Stephen's really funny because we used 2 cues, a John Hopkins cue and another track for the escape scene. And he's forever having people coming up to him saying, your music for the escape scene is amazing. And he's got to say,
It's a bit like Neil Jordan and Jim Sheridan, everybody saying, well done on my left foot. Well, yeah,
exactly.
So listen, on to a little bit to novels.
Yes.
So you've worked with novelists a fair bit now, obviously Emma Donoghue in Room, and Sally Rooney on Normal People, and again on the new film. What's it like taking, because I guess you work closely on the adaptations as well.
Yes.
Maybe talk to me a little bit about those 2 writers and your relationship with them, and maybe if there's differences or anything like that.
Yeah. So, I met Emma because I was chasing Room for ages. I hadn't made anything. Well, what Richard did is kind of adapted from, but in a really loose way, from a novel. It's really sort of reimagined out of the novel. But so Room is the first full novel adaptation. And I was trying to persuade this by then very famous writer who lived in Canada. She was Irish, but Irish Canadian and living in Canada, that me, who had really only at that point made 2 films, Adam and Paul in Garage, should be given her novel that was, everybody wanted to, there's a very sort of serious filmmakers looking for the rights. And so much of that happening is because we developed a really great personal relationship, So I wrote her this letter, and which I think is available online, where I told her sort of what I felt about the novel, how I felt it should be adapted. It was another one of those moments of great excitement where within 3 pages of starting to read it, I could see how it would work. Just not like there's millions of problems to solve then, in terms of the story and how plot works differently on film and all of the adaptation business that you're going to have to go through. But like for me, it's often just a tonal kind of like a strong flavor. Like I knew what we were after. And so I'd written her this letter, and I knew that she had liked that a lot as a letter, but she was still being advised to hold off because I wasn't probably considered like established enough to get the money really to make a film of that scale. But eventually, I think when I was supposed to be making Frank and my name was becoming associated with like bigger actors and things like that, because as a director, your capacity to attract actors is one of your most kind of marketable skill, not quite skill, but it's the thing that will attract producers and funders, because they go, oh yeah, well, that person, lots of wonderful actors want to work with them. So anyway, at that point I met Emma, and it was really just about personal connection, that we got on so well and had such a sort of laugh and a kind of meeting of minds in that first meeting, and we just sort of both said, shall we just do it? And that was it. And so again, that's at a human level, so much of this stuff stands or falls on the basis of the quality of relationships that you can form with people. But then through the process of adaptation, it's also about who you choose to collaborate with. Like I knew when I met Emma that she was a really good person, and that she wasn't kind of in that same defensive stance that I said earlier is not a healthy place to be. I'm very aware of the fact that she wanted to write the script. She had written a version of it, and she really we talked about what she'd written, and I talked about what I felt, where I felt it could go, and it was like just excitement, again. And also I think her not being too protective, because if I'd felt that from her, I wouldn't have wanted to go into that relationship in the same way that if she'd felt from me that I was just going to go, thank you very much now, off you go, she wouldn't have wanted. So we had to trust each other.
But she hadn't written it. That was her first screenplay that was
her first screenplay. Well. Okay. And we kind of spent a lot of time together. It's funny because I sort of, sometimes people ask me of things, what you think of the script when you read it or whatever. And I always think, God, I've never ever done anything where I've just been sent a script and gone, God, that's really good, I think I'll make it. And I think partially that's because part of the kind of job for me is shaping the thing so that it makes sense to me, and I feel like I'm able to do it. So with Emma, the process took quite a while, but we used to just spend a lot of time together, and Emma would write a draft, we'd sit together, we'd talk about it, we'd move things around in the mental kind of storyboard wall, and talk about tone and feeling and where we, and just, that was a constant process, and it was a really amazingly enjoyable one. With Sally, it's different because, again, it was the meeting and the absolutely getting on with each other incredibly well. And I think, so to go back to so I'll tell you a little bit about the origins of Normal People, because it's quite instructive in this regard. And it's again about relationships. So Ed read it first. It came out of a book scout, or it was just being talked about. It hadn't been published. And Ed said, you should read this. And I had said to Ed, as I have since said, and I continue to say on multiple occasions, I don't want to do another adaptation of a book. And then what happens is something that I find almost impossible to say no to comes along. Now, I have said no recently to things that were also, that I felt I initially couldn't say no to, but I think I've got better at that. But this book just absolutely, I just thought, this is such a great, like it's about Ireland now. There's just such an intimacy to the way that Sally writes that I think I'm it syncs up with the way I film actors, the way I like, I think the thing that I try to do, which is to give you a sense of closeness and proximity and presence of an actor, and allow story. I'm good at underplaying story in a way that I think makes it, if you get it right, makes it more powerful. So I was very excited by this. So what happened then was Ed was able to go to the BBC, with whom, again, we have really good relationships. I have a really good relationship with Rose Garnett. She's just amazing. I think probably the world's best exec. And I had met peers before, and Ed was able to go to them and say, look, we love this book. Lenny would like to sort of do it. And BBC said, okay, we'll give it a green light now. If you want to go to Sally, you can say, because we hadn't approached Sally yet. Sure. If we were able to go to Sally and say,
which is not really usual, I guess, to have a green light before you have the property.
Happens. It never happens. And it was, again, because of the quality of relationships Ed has with those people as well. And luckily a good track record, and me having done things that they liked. So we were able to go to Sally and say, if you like the idea of going with us, and if you're interested in our kind of, us as a creative home for this, then it will happen, and it will happen next year. And there's no process of like, developing a script, bringing it to the broadcaster, seeing if they like it. It's greenlit and is going to happen. And that was just really compelling for her. And she said yes. And then it was great because she wrote on it along with Alice Birch, who's an amazing British screenwriter and playwright, and Mark O'Rowe did an episode. And again, that was very joyful because there are other long-term collaborators within Elements, particularly Emma Norton and Chelsea Hoffman, right? Who are these two, they're just brilliant. Emma's a producer and Chelsea is like sort of head of development, but just a brilliant script person and like a massive career ahead of her. And I've always, for a long time, worked with them. Like I find they're like a brains trust around script for me. So we were able to just, the whole thing. But what I will say, why I started to differentiate between Room and normal people, is that television is very different from film in the sense that it's so much bigger in terms of like the machine you need to get up and running. Like if you have to produce 12 half-hour episodes, which are being posted, some are being posted while others are being shot, and you're still working on scripts for one while you're, it's just, you need a big team. And so it wasn't like I was able to just sit with, say, Sally and Alice for a few months and then go and make the film. It was an ongoing relationship, all mediated through Element with Emma and Chelsea and Ed, but really positive. And then working with another director as well, and that adds more kind of complexity to it, because I think I felt, and I felt it on conversations as well, like we couldn't deliver even on schedule if it was just me. It would be impossible.
Yeah. And how did you find that? Because like you were exec producing, so you were kind of, the boss in a way, but then you had Hetty McDonald, who's a really,
really established director. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the only thing you can do if you're a director, you have to, like, if you live by the sword, you have to kind of, well, if your principle is that you want freedom, which it is, then you have to afford that to the other director. And it has to work within the show.
Yeah, I was going to say, because if you look at those episodes, and I kind of did try to play the game of which episode did Hetty direct and which episode did Lenny direct, and who shot which episode. Yeah. A little bit nerdy about it. Yeah. But it's hard to tell sometimes. So there is the consistency.
There's a house style, and I think we picked both Hetty and, in the case of Conversations with Friends, Leanne Wellham, who's brilliant and amazingly collaborative. And there are bits of Leanne, I can see the style, the difference in kind of temperature and stuff in Normal People. Like, I really love Hetty's episodes, but I think it's quite interesting, and it fitted because there's really two phases to that story, and there's quite a slight tonal shift. But there's bits of Leanne's where I watch and go, well, I wouldn't be able to say, that feels like a really good version of what I would have sort of, my impulses would have been, because Leanne was brilliant at kind of getting inside the house style and then applying that in a way which is really specific to her episode. So but it's funny, giving notes to other directors is like, you know, and I try to be very, when I'm being the executive producer, I don't talk about it like I'm a director. I feel that wouldn't be fair.
Okay.
It's just try and talk about it in the way that everybody's talking about it, rather than go, well, I would have done this, or, you know.
Cool. I'm conscious that I want to make sure that we give people an opportunity
Yes,
to ask
absolutely.
questions. So I'm going to have one more question, but I'm going to say to everyone, have your questions ready so we don't have that kind of moment of there's no questions, and so just have your questions ready. But the last question I'm going to ask about is really around those that it's not around, but during normal people, there were a lot of uncomfortable moments in Irish, particularly Irish households, where everybody was in lockdown and grannies and mammies and kids were all watching the sex, and it felt like, you know, it was like a French movie, except it was in Ireland.
I know that was, it was amazing.
But what I'm interested about in terms of the collaboration is working with the actors, but also working with an intimacy coordinator and bringing another person into that bubble as well.
Well, it's funny, you said earlier that, you know, I've very kindly that I have, you know, people are positive about me as a person as well as liking my work, but I definitely do have a sort of a long memory for anything that's like anybody who's kind of questioned, you know, I have an ego, and I like everybody does. And I remember years ago, a French academic saying to me, you know, you can't shoot sex. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you know, in Prosperities, is that really painful sex scene, and in What Richard Did, it's just everybody. And I said, look, that's because in those stories, you know, that's what it was. But anyway, it always stayed in the back of my mind. And I think partially, like in a really pathetic way, one of the reasons I was so drawn to do Normal People was like, okay, right, let's see if that's true. So anyway, yes, it was. I mean, working with Ita was brilliant. Ita O'Brien was the intimacy coordinator, and she kind of invented the role in a way. But I think it's been a long time coming, because we are living, thankfully, in terms of like the politics of gender and right across through ideas of diversity, etc. We're living in a very different time, thank goodness, than we were when I started out like 25, 30 years ago. So the practices around sex scenes and how they were shot in the past, I know this from talking to actors, was just so bad. You know, there were so many ways in which actors were left very vulnerable. Sometimes directors would say, look, I'm too embarrassed, you guys make it up yourselves and we'll film it, which is like, that's deeply unprofessional, and it puts the actors in a really awkward position with each other. They should not have.
It's almost like saying, why don't you have sex with the cameras on? And
exactly.
You know better than I do. Like,
yeah, totally. So in fact, what happened with Ida was just like, I got inside her way of talking about how to talk to actors about it. And we always talked about like the idea that if you're talking to dancers, you know, the dancer is interested in how to use their body to express images and emotions. And a sex scene is the same. It's the actor using their physicality to create images. When you start thinking about that, it depersonalizes it in a way which is very healthy, I think. And then the intimacy coordinator really ultimately, once you understand that philosophy, is just there to go, well, actually, if you want to make it look like that, then a safe way to do that is if the actor holds their hand there, or it means that they can support themselves and it looks the way it should, but it's actually much more comfortable for them, and has lots of, you know, knowledge about how to use padding and all sorts of really practical stuff, right? But then it just, what's good is it liberates you to do what the scene should be about, which is, you know, like continuing to tell the story of those characters and those people. And so what I've learned to do is to think about sex scenes as not a different category of scene. Like, you know, it's, people used to shoot them like, oh God, here comes the action scene, you know, here's a car chase. But actually it's just people behaving with each other. And I think once you understand that, then you're free to kind of all be grown up. And actually in the end, we had great laughs doing those scenes, particularly after the first few times when the process was well known. And it was always very warm and light and collaborative. And I don't think anybody ever felt the sort of dreadful embarrassment that has been the norm previously.
Sure. Sure. And hopefully they were warm. Okay, so we might throw it open to questions. So hopefully this will work out. So I guess if somebody wants to put up their hand if they've got a question, and then we'll see if we can unmute them. Or you can type a question into the box if you want.
Oh yeah, I've got the box there.
Yeah. Everybody's always very quiet. Gotcha. Going to give it another second if not. Oh, yeah, okay, while we're waiting. Oh, do we have one?
We have one.
Oh, we do. So Edward, a ex viewfinder student. So I don't know, Edward, if you can switch your. Oh, there you are, and you're on. Go ahead.
Hi. First of all, thanks, Lenny, very much for taking your time to, share your experience with us.
Pleasure.
And I was wondering, you talked about your collaboration with the writers and the producers of some of your works, but I was wondering if you would like to share something about your collaboration with your cinematographers. Because I noticed you always change cinematographers for some reason. And I was wondering why and how the process works for you.
It's a really good question, because first of all, the closest collaboration I have with anybody through the making is with the cinematographer. And actually at the very sharp end of like my discussions and thinking around what we're doing, like at the purest filmmaking sort of level. In other words, like how do you take all your ideas of tone and your sense of the kind of flavor of this piece and its meanings and translate them into a series of shots that you're going to shoot on the floor when you're with your actors. And the person whose ear I chew about that is the cinematographer. And so I tried to get collaborating with the cinematographer in prep earlier than normal. So I tried to get the cinematographer to, instead of like 2 weeks prep or something, which you sometimes see happen on a film, in which case the cinematographer is immediately into the business of like crewing up and gear and the big bunches of stuff that just eat the days up. I want to be with that person much, much earlier so we can sit down, watch films together, talk about the script, develop a sort of shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve. And then depending on what the project is, talk through every single scene multiple times. And so it's a very intense relationship. And I think one of the reasons why there isn't like one cinematographer for me in the same way that there's like one editor, one composer, one producer, is because I think that relationship is so intense. It's like, you're sort of in the foxhole with that person for so long. And I think sometimes you just I find I need to step away. Now, I have worked with the same cinematographer more than once. So James Mather 3 times, Adam Paul Frank and Prosperity, Susie Lavelle twice, the 2 Sally Rooney's. But other than that, I have swapped. And I also think, here's another thing, because I work so closely with a cinematographer and we get into this kind of way of talking on a given project, I want to be I sometimes like the blank slate of somebody new who doesn't naturally just go to the thing that they know that I like, because I want to be I like to be uncertain and a little bit confused and allow that kind of discovery to happen each time. And so working with a cinematographer who doesn't quite know what I'm after, I sometimes find that quite useful, because they can throw things at me that that somebody who knows me better would probably go, well, Nelly never likes to do that. So, you know what I mean? So I'm always fascinated by new cinematographers. But do go back to others.
You are doing it because you're trying to find something new that otherwise the cinematographers you work with, they will never dare to propose? Or you are doing it?
That's interesting. Maybe, no, because they would, like, nobody's afraid or anything like that. But it's just, I think, so it's not about being afraid to propose. It's more like you can get into a comfortable pattern of working by the end of a film. And I'm always afraid that that's going to carry on to the next thing. So, and it also feels to me that there are particular projects that suit particular cinematographers. Maybe for me, it's a bit like, it depends on the area, like, but different, you know, you cast different actors because of something that they bring. And I'm just so particularly sensitive to the cinematographer that when I watch work and then meet people, what usually happens is that one conversation I have excites me more than the others. And sometimes that's with somebody that I've worked with before, and sometimes it isn't. And you might ask the question, why don't I do that with other people in my kind of circle? And I don't know why. I don't know the answer to that, but it definitely does happen to me with cinematographers. I have that kind of, I'm a bit like a magpie. I like to collect these fascinating new people.
They're also the DPs that you've worked with tend to be quite busy as well, and other things.
That is true.
I'm going to go. We've got a written question from second year, all of second year of film at IADT. Hello from all of second year. We were wondering if you could discuss some of your casting process, as it's something that they struggle with, particularly with no or low budget.
Yes. So I think the one thing to do with casting, it's probably I think you can, if you're making something with no or low budget, if the project is chosen carefully so that you're not like trying to do massive things that you can't afford to do, but you're working within in a controlled way with a project that suits that budget, you could make the best thing that's ever been made for a zero budget or small budget. However, the one place where you will fall down is if you don't get great people to be in it. I mean, like, and filmmakers, it's always good to know. I used to beat myself up when I was starting that if I didn't get a good performance, I used to think that directors had some magic, we're supposed to have some magic thing where they'd go up and whisper something in an actor's ear and that would unlock everything. And any failure was always the director's fault. But of course, again, it's collaboration. You're working with the materials that person brings. And if you don't have the right person, or the person's not a strong actor, it's really, really hard. So my advice, I'll talk about how I cast in a minute, but my advice would be to always push for people that you shouldn't have any right to cast, if you know what I mean. Like, the one place to be really ambitious is in casting. So it's about going and saying to somebody who, you admire, I understand that you probably won't have the time, and and I'm even cheeky asking, but I'd love you to consider this, because I think by that takes, that's about respecting yourselves as filmmakers as well. And it's about being ambitious and going, how far can we push this to make it really good? So that's a place like,
and I guess a knowledge of your material as well, to know if the material is good,
it's strong enough,
it can do more. Yeah,
exactly. But I mean, trying to get a crane versus trying to get an actor that you really want. Now, one might be about money and the other might be about like blancmange and persuasion and everything, but put your efforts into the actor, So the other thing I would say about casting, and this goes to what you're saying, Barry, is that it depends. People work in different ways, but for me, I hate very, very, very specific casting briefs going out. Like, Pete is a tall guy. He's got long hair that which he wears in a ponytail. He sometimes seems a little bit confused, but there's a steely center and black, there's just too much, right? And also, you might think of that character as having that kind of look, for example. And that means that all these really interesting actors that might have come in that don't look that way, you won't see. And the number of times that I have been deeply surprised by somebody who's come in and has not been what I had in my head, but it's just been amazing. And then again, that feeling of excitement, you go, oh my God, the whole project flips 180 with that person in a really interesting way. And rather than going, well, they don't fit that picture, ask yourself, which is the more interesting project, the one with that person or the one with that person, and go with the more interesting project. So don't over specify the briefs, be open when people come in. And if you're casting, and this is a huge piece of advice for filmmakers that it's a really easy one to act on as well, which is say less. Don't, and I think there's a real pressure on a filmmaker to go, I better look like I know what I'm doing. I'll explain the whole project to this person. They come in, I'll talk in detail about the character. But again, for an actor, that's a lot of stuff coming in. And you're doing things to them before they've shown you what they've what they come in with. So shutting up is a brilliant creative move, I find, so say hello and and then just watch, and then let that wash over you, and be sensitive to the material and that person, and see how those things match. And then, I think, and keep work. The other thing is keep working on the material, because you will learn things from what an actor does in an audition, even if it's not right and that person isn't right. I'm scribbling notes on the script all the time during casting, which are notes about the script, not just about the cast. Nothing is fixed until it's all fixed.
And I guess develop some good relationships with casting directors.
Exactly. Go and talk to somebody like Louise Kiley and say, if you feel you've got, and your tutors are saying this is really good, why not?
Go for it. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we have Adam, who's got his hand up. There we go.
Hi, Adam.
Hello. Hi, Lenny. So like you, I'm part of like the relatively small and sparse Jewish community in Dublin. And I was just wondering how that kind of different cultural identity, if at all, influenced your work, because it's sort of different to the, traditionally Irish cultural identity. And, particularly considering a lot of your work is very esoterically Irish, I suppose I'm curious to know how that sort of influenced your choice in film.
I mean, it's a great question. So I grew up in kind of secular but traditional house, which is a lot of us might have.
Yes.
But cultural influences were definitely perhaps more kind of broader than they might have been if I had the kind of the broader identity of most of the people that I hung out with or that were around me. So, odd, like vaudevillian American comedy and sort of like, so grew up with Jewish comedians and that kind of, and Middle European kind of cultural leanings, which I think does feed into things like my interests that kind of inflected Adam and Paul in a particular way that gave it a more European kind of quality. I'm sure all those things play. But then again, if I look at the people that I worked with, like Mark, everybody has, it's intersectional. So Mark, who is a guy from a white male from Ennis, is also gay. And he had his own sort of journeys, which were sort of outside the mainstream. I think it isn't a surprise that people who are somehow slightly outside of the mainstream in whatever way. So whether it's your kind of cultural, ethnic, religious background, your sexuality or whatever, or your gender, it does, I think, force a sort of like distance is useful if you want to see something. If you're right up close to it, it's hard to see. And if you step back a bit, it's and it's funny because I've started now working on a project which is about that, a period in my life around when I was about 11 or 12. And I've started to think really hard about my suburban Dublin upbringing and how bizarre it was also coming from this other kind of tradition. And I think we all grow up, I don't know, I certainly grew up with the feeling that, oh God, my life is so prosaic, if only there was something odd about me or something adventurous would happen, and you're reading Russian literature and it's all about these people that have fantastic names and sound like they're, in the middle of drama. And it's only as you get older that you realize everybody's background is extraordinary. Everybody's family is kind of bonkers. So I think part of growing up is realizing that, is understanding the particularities of your own story, and if you're a creative person, trying to use those so your experience will be completely different to mine. That was one intersection, but it'll also have all these other resonances. But I think embracing, if you're right, and if you want to instigate and create your own projects, those areas are those odd and sometimes uncomfortable areas are the things to probe, because that's usually where the good stuff is.
Yeah.
So are you writing something set in Rathfarnham of all places?
I am actually writing something set in Churchtown, Rathfarnham and other places. I'm actually writing, it's like I don't know whether it'll be a series or whether it'll be a film or 3 films. At the moment, it's like, so it would be 3 same family, but 1950s, late 70s, and 2010s.
Okay.
And it's a kind of it's a big undertaking, but I've been thinking about it for quite a while. So that's why I've been turning things down and it's painful. You know, I've turned down some things but I know that if I'm going to write it, I better just sit down and do it.
Please have a scene in the Bramer rooms.
Oh God, yeah.
Are there actually, Adam? Are you? Did you want to come back or?
No, thank you. That was
cool. You're cool. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Just wondering if there's any other hands showing.
Oh, sorry. If I could just ask Lenny.
Sure.
Did you go to the synagogue in Rathfarnham?
No. Yes, the one in Terranure.
Yes.
It's like I did. Actually, we were members in Adelaide Road, but I have been in that synagogue millions of times. Yeah, I wasn't very religious, nor was I. I mean, I've always felt like I'm an atheist, but culturally, yeah. And I did my bar mitzvah and all that stuff. Actually, the same about 4 days away from the Pope in Phoenix Park, which is like.
Did you go to the Pope in the Phoenix Park?
I did not go to the Pope, but I sat at home 2 days after or 3 days after my bar mitzvah, watched it on the telly.
Left out. It was miserable, absolutely miserable. I'm going to ask for last questions, and while I'm asking for last questions, has there an experience of where it just hasn't worked? So you get on with people. You're clearly an easy guy to get on with. You like people. You have friendships. But has there been a situation where it's just gone sour?
Yeah, there has. Very few. There've been projects that haven't worked. Many, projects that haven't worked without it going sour, where they just went off the boil, or I lost faith in it, or we couldn't get it right, and we just decided after a certain time, you know what, let's just walk away. That happens all the time, and I think it's very important, at least for me, to be developing more than one thing at a time, because there's a danger if you put all your eggs in one basket that you will not want to admit when something's not working. You know, it's too painful if that's all you've got. And then I think actually for me, really only once or twice have I fallen out with somebody. I've certainly had difficult relationships with actors, you know, on set. I never got personal in any way, but they've been, you know, tricky and hard. And it's one of the things about directing that's probably, when that happens, it's the worst part of the thing, you know, because it's just stressful and unpleasant and whatever. And then, but I only really fell out with one person, really, you know, in terms of like just not really wanting to collaborate with them again and walking away with a sort of sour taste. But that's not bad in, like, I don't know, 30 years of making stuff.
Not too shabby. We've got Linda Carroll's hand up. Hey, Linda.
Hi,
Linda.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And you?
I'm not a film student. I'm just a huge fan of your work.
You're very good.
I'm a punter. I'm the one that goes to the cinema.
You're my favorite type.
But I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for your time, and it's really interesting. And welcome to IEDT and FilmEU. The second thing is, I suppose I have two. First of all, Adam and Paul is in one of my top 10 films. And I must have watched it about 5 times. And
wow.
I love it so much is because you made the characters very realistic. You know, we all have somebody like that in our neighborhood. Well, I suppose some of us, depending on where you live. But I just thought you kept it real. And I also thought the 2 characters were so lovable. I just loved them. I really did. Like, I fell for them, even though I shouldn't. I just did. And they made me both laugh and cry, which is incredible. And if a film can do that to you, make you laugh and cry, then it's a winner for me.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about Normal People. Do you remember I'm just curious about how you felt about the jokes with Normal People, because sometimes the 2 of them talked.
Oh, yeah.
Low. And she might say to him, do you want toast?
Yeah.
And he'd say, are you having toast?
Yeah.
Well, if you're having toast. And there was loads of jokes about that. And I'm just wondering, but did you get that feeling, that slow tone feeling from the book, or did you just put that in yourself?
I think.
And how did you feel about all the jokes about it?
I mean, I love the jokes. I actually, there's this show Dead Ringers on, I think it's Radio 4, which is basically verbal spitting images, you know, and they ran a Marianne and Connell scene every week for about, and I used to listen to that just myself for the fun of it, you know, before, and then I was really flattered when they did it, you know. Yes, I think that like the silences between them and the kind of normal, or the sort of, what I found interesting about her writing is that if you look at it, if you analyze what people say to each other or what she says about them, it's very simple. It's usually like description of action or what somebody thought or, you know, a gesture or whatever. And trying to use the same very spare language in the filmmaking was something that I wanted to do from the beginning. And it's always, you're on the edge of falling off into nothing. You know, I always say to people, like, getting close to almost nothing happening, but it being really powerful is the sort of holy grail. But you can, you know, you're always on that knife edge. And for some people, here's what I thought. I thought that when people watch the show, we would have a small audience of people who love cinema and love art house cinema and Sally Rooney fans, and that there was absolutely no chance that we would get a big audience. That's what I felt. So, especially given what you're pointing out, like it's quite slow, it's very low key, and yet it seemed to capture the audience. I mean, in a way that we really didn't anticipate. But hopefully I stay on just the right side of it. But I really loved the parody, and I loved all I mean, we all got such a kick out of stuff like, you know, Connell's chain having its own Instagram, you know, account that had like hundreds of thousands of followers. It was so bizarre. I mean, you know,
how much did that raise? That raised a load of money for charity at some point.
It did raise a lot of money for charity. But also, here's my son who's 13. We were asking what you want for Christmas, which shows how much of a practicing Jew I am. And he says, I'd love a little silver chain, right? And I said, where'd you get that idea from? He said, I don't know, just quite a lot of people have them and some of my friends have them. And then I went into a jeweler's in town and I said, do you have any little silver chains? And the lady said, oh yeah, just over here. And she brought me over to a display which had Connell's chain written over it.
You know, you have arrived.
You know, you've arrived.
I promised you, and I promised everyone that we would wrap this before the hour went, because everyone's got classes and everything like that. So
brilliant.
Lenny, I just really want to thank you for taking the time.
Not at all, Barry. It's an absolute pleasure. Nice to see you.
And also just quickly to thank Lena Marie in Element, Lena Marie Fitzgerald in Element, and Joanna at Lusofina for working all the Zoom stuff and making it happen. And to thank everyone for attending, and to remind everyone that this is on every week during term time, not with Lenny every week. We don't have to, he doesn't have to turn up every week, but we'll have at each school, every 4 weeks, we'll have a different expert to come and have a chat, always at 12, 1 or 2, depending on your time zone. But again, Lenny, thank you so much for everything.
Pleasure, and good luck to everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.